Cluster grouping is my favorite differentiation strategy. It's not everybody's favorite differentiation strategy, but it's mine. And what I like about it is that it gives me an opportunity to use pre-assessment as a way to group kids so that I can get the most out of the kids that I have, intellectually, social, emotionally, etc. Many of you know Julie Donaldson. Julie Donaldson always described this cluster grouping strategy using this candy wrapper metaphor that Diane Hecox and Richard Cash used in their Differentiation for Gifted Learners book. She would talk about the fact that everyone in their curriculum has some sort of sweet spot where flexible grouping would be the best use of your time. Everyone's got a spot in their curriculum where all of a sudden some kids are like, dude, I don't know what's going on. And other people are like, woohoo, I'm ready to move on. And that cluster grouping is really a great strategy so that you can meet both groups' needs at the same time. One question I'm frequently asking is why? Why, Meredith? Why do we have to use cluster grouping? What I like about cluster grouping is I think it helps group kids who are ready for more advanced concept, and it helps group students who need remediation and reteaching, and then allows you to do what is best for those kids. You can group kids in a lot of different ways. I prefer to group kids by whether or not they've mastered the content, but you could also group kids based on reading levels and have, different people reading readings on the same topic, but that are written at different levels based on whether or not they could access it. You could also group kids based on what are their learning styles, like are they auditory learners, are they visual learners, are they kinesthetic learners? I normally do it by pre-assessment based on what your academic abilities are, but there's obviously a lot of different ways that you can group kids. What I like about cluster grouping is that it's better for GT kids both academically and emotionally. If they are grouped with kids who want to connect with the content in a deeper level, what happens when you have heterogeneous groups, if some people have mastered it and other people have not mastered it, is that the people who have not mastered it feel shame that they haven't mastered it, and so they bully the kids who have mastered it, and then what happens is the gifted kid tries to hide and pretend like they don't know what's going on, or the gifted kid will lash out at the other kid who's still mastering the content and treat them like garbage, neither of which is an awesome solution. And so it really works out better, in my opinion, as an educator, to group people so that people can actually do what they need to be doing together, and that will also create a safe space for kids to either be learning the content or to be trying to sort of take the content to the next level. On Wednesdays and Thursdays, when I was teaching at Jefferson, I would always use the formative assessment that I gave to put together groups. So on Mondays, my AP Government class, I would have people take a quiz. It was 10 points. It went into the formative assessment. You could fail all of them. You could still do great in the class. Who cares? But the fact is that I would use that 10-point quiz for the groups on Wednesdays and Thursdays. My students never figured that out. They never understood how they ended up in the Leia group, the Yoda group, the R2D2 group, da-da-da-da-da. They never figured that out. And that was awesome. And every week the groups are changing, and that's because even if you're a super smart kid, that didn't mean that you aced this quiz, because maybe you had homecoming the week before, or maybe you were super busy with this cross-country meet and you didn't have time to actually finish reading the chapter. But what I would do is I would group kids together, and different groups were the high, low, whatever group different weeks. So just because you're in the Ray group, that doesn't mean anything this week. Maybe the Leia group is the high group this week, or maybe the Leia group this week is the low group. It really depends on what was going, what I did that week. But so these flexible groups would change, and they were only for your Wednesday class period or your Thursday class period. What I did in this one is that everybody did the same Federalist Papers discussion questions. What I did is that the Federalist Papers discussion questions were really based on sort of using Bloom's, where the first couple of questions are very knowledge and comprehension based. So they took a quiz on the Federalist Papers, which is probably the most difficult reading we do trimester 1 in AP US Government. It's kind of like the William Shakespeare of political science. And so if you didn't do very well on that assignment, on that quiz, you were in a group and you were working with other people who also similarly did not understand the comprehension knowledge type pieces about it. And so it meant that you spent most of your time on that part of the assignment, and you didn't necessarily get to as many of these questions up here. But if you were in the other groups, you got to spend more time sort of going to these. So these were the types of questions I gave. So the people who didn't really understand the material were spending more time on the key concepts questions, on what was the influence of the Federalist Papers, what were the key ideas that were unique to the time. But the kids who were more sophisticated political scientists, they were spending more of their time on this level of questions. And everybody had the same amount of time, but people, based on what groups they were accessing sort of different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And that's one way that I would do this. My students actually really liked getting into groups. Every Wednesday and Thursday, they really liked the fact that all the groups were named after Star Wars characters. Obviously, you don't have to use Star Wars characters, but they thought that was fun. Another example of using cluster grouping is one that I designed this week with Sarah Dahl-Weiland, where students are going to take their civil liberties quiz on a Monday. It will be based on chapter 4. There's a lot of layers to that chapter. If you look at it, there's sort of like at a basic core level, you have to understand the First Amendment. There are going to be a ton of questions on the First Amendment on the AP exam, on the unit exam. They're going to show up on the free response question. And if you struggle on the quiz, that's really where we need you to spend your time. And so Sarah and I designed a quiz that's going to sort of put kids into two categories: kids that have mastered it, kids that are still struggling with it. The kids who are still struggling with those key concepts are going to watch a short video, and then they are going to do a reading, which is an edited piece from a Supreme Court case that deals with the First Amendment, Engle v. Vitale. And they are going to be told to read that case, really focus on that case, and come up with discussion questions for their Socratic Circle that will happen on the longer period that week, on that Wednesday or Thursday. The students who have mastered key concepts will be in the group that will focus on the Second Amendment. Now, the Second Amendment is also on the AP exam, obviously, but there are not nearly as many types of questions, and it really gives students an opportunity to sort of get in deeper into the content, particularly since focusing on how the Supreme Court has reinterpreted the Second Amendment gets at the incorporation doctrine. It sort of gets at the changing nature of the Supreme Court. It gets at the role of interest groups at the National Rifle Association, and so it really gives them more in-depth content, not all of which do they need for the AP exam, but all of which would make them better thinkers and political scientists. And so those students are going to similarly watch a short video and then read an edited version of the McDonald versus Chicago decision that the Supreme Court made around gun control. And then they too will prepare for Socratic Circle on that document. Then both groups are going to do their Socratic Circle, where they're in the circle with their peeps who read the same document, but they're going to be observed by people who read the other document. So both groups will be sharing with each other and accessing higher level content, because they're going to have to use Costa's level of reasoning and come up with higher order thinking questions for the Socratic Circle. But they're really focusing on things that they need to know or things that they're ready to focus on. The key to this type of differentiation is for teachers to be familiar with above grade level standards and sort of think about what are the things that students have to know, what are the things that would be awesome if students know, so that people can differentiate. It's important to know that differentiation means more than just doing something different. Like the quintessential example is like a kid gets a 10 out of 10 on their spelling assignment, and so then their differentiated activity is that they have to use the words they already know and make a song out of those spelling words. Well, that's not teaching them anything new. That's just like a Mickey Mouse jump through piece. So the idea is that then, instead have them be able to learn some new words that they don't actually know, to go beyond in terms of their vocabulary. The other key thing for differentiation is the differentiated task should be of equal work or effort. So for this example that Sarah and I created together, the students are each going to watch a video, and they're each going to do a reading, and they're each going to do a Socratic Circle. No one group is going to say, hey man, you got the short end of the stick, or hey man, you got a worse deal than me because, I have to do this thing, and because doing something differentiated, already mastering content should not be seen as a punishment. It's just that people need to learn different things. Another example from my 12th grade regular government class, they did not read the chapter as independently as my AP kids did, so I did not give quizzes, for example, at the beginning of the unit. I would give quizzes after we had covered the content. And so I gave quizzes on chapters 9 and 12, and then but we always would spend a day or two reviewing for the actual exam. And so what I would do for that review day is I would divide kids up into 4 different groups. Group 1 would be the students who struggled with chapter 9, and they would work on review questions that dealt with that chapter. Similarly, if you just struggled with chapter 12, you'd be in that group. Some students struggled with both, and so then I'd really have to whittle down and figure out what were the key concepts that they really need to focus on, and that would be the group I would spend the most time with. And then group 4, they didn't struggle with either chapter. They got, great quiz scores. They're probably going to get an A on the test. And so instead, I take a AP reading that is not written in an academic way. It's written like in a newspaper article-y way. And they do that in class. It's not assigned as homework, and they're doing that at the same time that these other kids are reviewing. But what it's doing is it's enriching them, and it's giving them more depth so that then when they get to the test, they will have more examples. They will have a deeper understanding, but they won't be pretending to do review, which actually they don't need to do. My last example is one that my partner who teaches at Mounds View for the Mounds View Public School System uses. She teaches AP Calc. She taught Calc 1 as well as Calc 2. And what she does is near the end of the year, her sweet spot in her curriculum is that she has some kids who are ready to take the AP exam, and she's got other kids who need like 3 to 4 weeks of review in order to even try to get a 3 on that test. And so she does a pre-test assessment, and then she divides them into 2 groups. Kids that need to work on the AP review book and people who are ready to learn a new topic. There is more than enough math in the world. Math is endless. There's lots of cool math stuff. So what Anne did in her PLC with her colleague Rebecca is they designed some flipped videos, which they designed many years ago, and they've been using ever since. And so kids that are done with, who've really mastered the AP Calc content, who don't need to spend 3 to 4 weeks reviewing, get to instead spend that time again, just working in class. It's not extra homework, but they are learning new, exciting concepts that are going to help prepare them for Calc 2 or for Calc 3, but to deepen their ability as mathematicians rather than spending time working on review questions or review-free responses, which, a matter of fact, would be sort of mind-numbing for them. So my hope is that through this you've gotten some examples of how to differentiate. I think that differentiation is awesome and really important, but I also think it needs to be sustainable. And so again, if you go back to what Julie Donaldson talked about with that candy wrapper, you want to be thinking about what are the sweet spots that you have in your curriculum, places where you get that that big divide. That's where you want to start using differentiation. Differentiation doesn't have to be a daily thing, but it would be great if it could be a when you see that divide thing. Thank you for watching this video.